This is the Fear and Greed Saturday edition, a look at some of the most memorable stories of the week. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Morning, Michael.
Now, our Saturday show, Sean, is all about the two of us, each nominating what we think is the biggest story of the week, the most remarkable story, the sleeper story, and then our favourite story. And because we are just a little bit competitive, we will see if we can agree on a winner.
I think we're about 1-1 for the last 2 weeks too. So this week really matters. Who's going to take the lead?
Well, I have a very good feeling about my choice of stories, so let's jump into it. What do you think was the biggest story of the week?
Well, Joe Biden, the US president, and Xi Jinping, the Chinese president meeting, Michael. It's obvious.
That's going to be a very hard one to beat, actually. I have big story regret at the moment. Carry on.
Well, it's the biggest meeting we've had for a number of years between the two superpowers. They emphasised the need for cooperation when they met earlier in the week, which was great. It's the first face-to-face summit, or virtual summit at least, and it went on for 3 hours. It was only expected to go for about 90 minutes, so the two looked like they actually enjoyed each other's company. It was pretty free-ranging. Went from Taiwan to human rights to trade. Nothing seemed too off limits, which is great. There was no specific breakthrough or any agreement, but certainly the atmosphere seemed to be fairly respectful and cordial, which was great. In fact, Mr. Xi called the US his old friend. I think that's very different to what he would have said if Donald Trump was president still. Now, obviously, none of us want to return to the Cold War days. Remember the United States versus Russia and all that carry on that all ended in 1987. That was dreadful. None of us want that. I don't think China or the US want that. It was really interesting to see that Mr. Xi's deputy later in the week actually talked about China's need to engage with the rest of the world. All of these are just little steps that might bring the two superpowers closer together. Let's hope it's the start of something. I'd like to see what your story is this week that's going to beat that one.
It's going to be very hard to beat, actually, because when you think about it, a couple of months ago, the likelihood of those two leaders holding any kind of talks was pretty slim, really.
Absolutely. And I mean, seriously talking about military action a few months ago around Taiwan.
Yeah.
In fact, Peter Dutton, the Defence Minister in Australia, is still talking about it in some regards. But just the fact that these two are talking, it's good news.
All right. Well, I am still going to back myself on my story choice for the biggest story of the week. For me, and it feels a little bit funny going from China and the US to talking about the housing market.
Oh, you jest, surely. The biggest story of the week, the housing market.
Well, it is, because where do we all live, Sean? We live in houses, so it matters to everybody. It started last weekend with a shortage of buyers at auctions, particularly in Sydney. When I say a shortage, they've really kind of gone from having 10 bidders at an auction to having 3. I've had an auction where we're trying to sell a place and we had 0 bidders, so I would love to have 3 bidders at an auction. It was still a pretty good clearance rate nationally, 75%. Not too bad, but it was down from the peak last month. There has been a flood of new listings. There are a couple of things, though, that suggest that the market is, in fact, cooling. On Monday, the boss of the Prudential Regulation Authority said that they're worried about high loan-to-valuation ratios. That's basically where someone's borrowing more than 80% of the cost, as well as concern about banks lending to borrowers with high debt-to-income ratios. That would be a bit of a warning sign on its own. The RBA, though, is keeping a close eye on it too. And then you've even got the Australian Bureau of Statistics saying that home ownership has fallen. It's getting harder to pay off a mortgage. And surprise, surprise, younger people are more affected. You, Sean, on Monday made the call that the housing market has come off the boil. Put all of this together, and I think you've got the biggest story of the week because it affects so many of us.
1-0 to me.
I agree with you. Anyway, I will move on. I will concede that one to you. I started with high hopes, and as soon as you said China, I knew those hopes were dashed. Let's move on to the most remarkable story. What was your pick this week?
Well, the Commonwealth Bank's share price falling more than 8% in one session. Commonwealth Bank, that's the biggest bank in the country. It's the biggest company on the bourse. It's everyone's favourite bank, the Commonwealth. They came out and they said they made $2.2 billion cash profit for the quarter. Great. But profit margins have been squeezed. They didn't actually say by how much. They just indicated that was happening. Now, banks primarily make profit on the difference between what they pay out in deposits and what they receive in loans in terms of the interest rates. That is being squeezed. What you're seeing in the home loan market, particularly where banks make a lot of money, is a lot more competition. ANZ, it missed the home loan boom, is trying to fight back. Westpac, it's been really poorly performing, and anecdotally at least, it's fighting back. And Commonwealth Bank is feeling the pinch. Also, people are taking out fixed rate loans rather than variable rate loans. That's because fixed rate loans have a lower interest rate, and that's hurting the bank. What's worrying for the other banks and the sector in general is that the Commonwealth Bank says it's performing well relative to the system itself. So what's happening to the other banks? Their share prices were sold off too. So bank stocks have been performing well. NAB's up nearly 30% over the last year. Commonwealth and ANZ are up about 27%. Westpac's 15%. The ASX overall is up 13%. So banks certainly have outperformed. But wow, what a sell-off of Commonwealth Bank shares. That's why it's the most remarkable story of the week.
That was a remarkable story, but I got in early and reserved the most remarkable story of the week the moment you mentioned it on Wednesday morning. Nobody has really liked handling cash during the pandemic, and that's really what makes this story even more remarkable. According to the Reserve Bank, the value of Australian banknotes has doubled in a decade, and it's up 20% since the start of the pandemic. Apparently, people are hoarding it, and there is something in the vicinity of $50 to $75 billion in Australian banknotes stashed away in people's houses. They are not in my house, I can assure you of that. Low interest rates make people think that the money's maybe better off with them rather than in the bank. Also, there's a certain amount of security in having cash. Plus, I suspect that the cash economy is alive and well despite recent warnings from the tax office of a crackdown, just because of the numbers involved in this. $75 billion, particularly in the larger denominations, the 50s and 100s. That is just extraordinary. The scale of that makes that the most remarkable story of the week. So it's 1-1.
Well, can I just put an adjunct there? I think yours is remarkable and interesting. Mine's remarkable because the share price went down, but yours has just got that little bit of left field about it. So I'm going to give it to you begrudgingly.
And I think it's because people are wondering who has all this cash tucked away.
Yeah.
And suddenly everyone's just looking at everyone going, oh, where's your money hidden? Now, let's move on to the sleeper story. What's yours this week?
I think this is an amazing story. Climate change has hit home lending. So National Australia Bank came out and said it will discount home loan interest rates for customers who are reducing household emissions. NAB is part of an alliance of global banks, which includes lenders from the UK, Canada and Italy. That alliance has backed a home sustainability rating tool, which is actually being developed by a company in Adelaide. It's known as Greenhouse. Basically, Greenhouse helps households set up smart meters and install solar and batteries. And if you can show you're going to reduce emissions, you'll get a discount on your home loan rate. This is a totally new front in home lending. It hasn't happened in Australia before. Potentially, banks will be able to provide shareholders with a view of the emissions intensity of their home lending portfolios. And in the race to net zero, that's really important. It's also a great differentiator in the home lending market. We saw with the Commonwealth Bank story I was just talking about how difficult it is in that market. If you can differentiate yourself and say, look, reduced emissions will give you a lower rate, suddenly you have a competitive advantage. This is really a big change to home lending. That's why I think it's the sleeper story.
Sean, that is a brilliant story. I have really seriously overestimated my likelihood of winning this week, but I'm going to give you mine anyway.
Righto.
My sleeper story is really only a sleeper in Australia. In the US, it is much, much bigger news. I'm talking about the growth of some of the other electric vehicle companies in the United States. Everyone knows about Tesla. There's nothing sleeper about Tesla. Market cap of more than $1 trillion US. It's pretty hard to ignore. Plus, we're actually starting to see quite a few Teslas on the road here. The novelty is starting to wear off a little bit. If I asked you, Sean, to pick out the logo for Tesla or for Ford or for VW, you would, I'm sure, be able to do it in an instant. But I don't know about you, but I would not have any idea what the badge for Rivian looks like or for Lucid. But Rivian's share price keeps climbing. It's now worth more than Volkswagen. Lucid is surging. It's worth more than Ford. Lucid won Car of the Year this week with their first ever sedan. One model can go for 800 kilometres on a single charge. Rivian's due here next year. Lucid doesn't have Australian plans yet, but you can be sure that at some point it will be here. It's a sleeper story for me because electric vehicle competition is getting hotter. These companies are getting really, really big, but because all the action is really happening overseas, it's a little bit more subdued in Australia. So, sleeper story, not as good as yours, but still a
good story. Definitely.
All right, let's bring it home strong. It's 2-1 at the moment, so I'm determined to win this one. What is your favourite story of the week?
This is a podcast called Fear and Greed, right? So at some point, we have to pay homage to greed. I love the Afterpay story. It held its AGM this week, and Chair Alana Rubin and co-CEOs Anthony Eisen and Nick Molnar said the Buy Now, Pay Later group could become a global player if the $39 billion deal with Square goes ahead. Now, the number that surprised me most at the annual general meeting was that Afterpay said it had created $8.2 billion in new revenue for retailers from its referral system. That is another income stream for Afterpay. It's also a really big data player, and I think that's probably one of the key reasons why Square likes it. Why is it my favourite? It's just a great success story of an Australian company. Basically, Nick Molnar, he lived near Anthony Eisen. He yelled across a road one day. This is according to Anthony, who was on our show not so long ago. He yelled across to his neighbour and said, "Hey, I've got an idea." That was about 6 years ago. Now they're selling it for $39 billion. How can you not love that story?
Oh, I do, but I love this one more. I am a bit of a plane nut, so I'm actually going to group two stories from this week together. They're both about aircraft. First, there was a story out of Airbus. So they had pretty lean sales, as you can imagine, during COVID. No one was really flying anywhere. But Airbus is now predicting a massive surge in demand for lower emissions planes. They reckon airlines really, but also freight companies, leasing businesses will buy nearly 40,000 new aircraft in the next 20 or so years. That's pretty incredible demand. But, Sean, if a commercial flight isn't your scene, and you are talking about the greed side here, you can join the hordes rushing to the private jet scene. Data out of the US suggests that more than 4.2 million private jet flights have taken place this year. There's been a record number in each of the past 6 months. Not really surprising, I suppose, considering commercial flight schedules have been a bit up in the air during COVID. You're welcome. And it seems like private jets are actually getting just a little bit more accessible. We've actually spoken on Fear and Greed this year to Luke Hampshire, who is the founder of a company called Airly in Australia that lets you book individual seats or kind of share a jet with others if it happens to be heading in the direction that you need to go, kind of like Uber.
Kind of.
But at a much, much more different scale, I suppose. But two good stories, both about planes. They're my favourite for the week.
Okay, you get that one. I love the plane story too. 2-2. You get to. We need a tiebreaker. Which was the best of the lot? You get to choose that, Michael.
Okay, if I have to pick one overall, it is going to be the China and US story. I think you won it from the moment you started talking today, Sean. So okay. I'm going to concede. You are the winner.
Thank you very much. 2-1. Off we go.
Now, just a reminder that we've had some great interviews this week as well, everything from tech entrepreneurs to professional investors. Definitely worth a listen. And if you do want to catch up on any of those or indeed any of the shows from the past week, they're all available on your favourite podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au, where, of course, you can also sign up for our free daily newsletter. Thank you very much, Sean.
Enjoy your Saturday, Michael.
Thank you. And don't forget that tomorrow, Sean and I will both be back with Adam Lang from the Fear and Greed team to have a bit of a lighter look at some of the news around the place. I'm Michael Thompson. Have a good Saturday and a great weekend.